Good morning to everybody. Welcome to our first session this morning. The title, it's quite comprehensive: World on the Edge, Polycrisis, Chaos, Polarization, and the Battle for Global Balance. There's no doubt the contemporary world is facing an accumulation of interconnected crises, sometimes referred to as a polycrisis. Today's challenges: climate change, food insecurity, pandemics, global inflation, regional wars, and geopolitical tensions are cumulative and mutually reinforcing. The war in Ukraine illustrates this dynamic. Beyond its military dimensions, it has led to an energy crisis in Europe, disrupted global grain supplies, and weakened financial markets. Geopolitical divisions are another major dimensions of this polycrisis situation. Rivalries between major powers, particularly between the United States and China, are redrawing alliances, while Russia is seeking to strengthen its influence in Africa and the Middle East. Domestically, societies are also experiencing divisions. The rise of populism in Europe and the United States of America, political instability in several African countries, and disinformation amplified by social media. These dynamics are causing global mistrust and weakening multilateral institutions, which are often perceived as powerless in the face of crisis. This is the framework of our today's discussion that I will start right away with the former Finnish Prime Minister, Mrs. Kiviniemi. Mary, are we witnessing the emergence of a balanced multipolar world or lasting fragmentation of this new world order, and what kind of consequences this might have for the world in the future?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here today. Happy to participate in these discussions, and I think it's utmost important that we all are here today trying to solve these challenges the world is facing. And this really is so that we are living in a polycrisis world. All the risks what we are globally facing, they affect almost all the countries because the world is so interconnected and risks are multifaceted and have multidimensional. And when we think about the risks what we are facing now, the World Economic Forum publishes every year the Global Risk Report, and it asks from experts, from senior officials, from representatives of academia, politicians, what are the biggest risks the world is facing right now, kind of in the short term. So number one this year was state-based armed conflicts. Number second, extreme weather events. Number three was geo-economic conflicts. And number four, misinformation and disinformation. And number five, societal polarizations. So this really is a good picture of that, how we all feel now. And we live in a very unpredictable world. I think that every one of us who wakes up in the morning looks at the news, what has happened during the night, like what we did today. And when it comes to environmental risks, they are so severe that we see the consequences every day. And also, when it comes to geopolitics, what has President Trump done during the night?
Or what he's tweeting.
Yes, what he has tweeted, that really is the question mark. And I think that we should break down the problem into pieces, and we should analyze it and try to find solutions together. And I see kind of four very worrying tendencies. And number one is concerns the multilateralism. I think that the world is a bit drifting away from rules-based cooperation. I'm a bit worried about this, not too worried, because there are also kind of silver lining to this cloud. For example, the UN General Assembly week, everyone was there. And despite the fact that there's less money going to UN organizations, still countries want to, and at least try to solve these challenges together, like in COP meeting. The second trend, which I find is very worrying, is concerns trade. There are very big difficulties for open trade, which really have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. This globalized economy really is the key for well-being and better equipped societies. And now we live in a world of tariffs, industrial policies, and other trade or protectionist measures. And one concrete example of this is when it comes to kind of the development in recent years, that according to IMF, almost 3,000 trade restrictive measures were introduced in 2023, nearly 3 times as many as in 2019. So the number of these measures is really increasing. And the third worry I have in mind is the rise of authoritarian tendencies. A Swedish think tank publishes a democracy report every year, and its title this year was 25 Years of Autocratization, Democracy Trumped? ? And it really is so that now around 72% of the world's population now lives in some form of autocracy, and that is the highest share in their time series since the late 1970s. So very worrying progress. And number 4, when it comes to my worries, is democracy. Democracy really is under pressure. Polarization and shrinking civic space is something what we are now seeing this development in many countries, also in those ones which have been kind of the role models for democracy. And also one concrete example concerning this trend, according to International Ideas Global State of Democracy report, around 45% of countries have declined on democracy indicators, while only about 25% have improved. And this is the biggest drop since a long time. So these developments are really something which we should tackle together, and our joint efforts are needed, but also actions at the national levels.
Yes, and many of the liberal democracies are on the brink of autocracies these days as well. Coming back to this, Mr. Lajčák, we have heard whose tweets are the most expected every morning or every afternoon, depending on the time difference. How much Donald Trump's return to the White House and America First 2.0 have influenced or impacted, disrupted the geopolitical balance and multilateralism in the world? Now we have some time after 20th of January. Perhaps it's too early or not too early to say, but some sketches could be seen.
Good morning, everyone. Well, the short answer to your question is very much. The longer answer is that I will use the quote from Henry Kissinger. I think Trump
loved that.
Trump can be one of those figures in history who appears from time to time to mark the end of an era and to force it to give up its pretenses. It doesn't necessarily mean that he knows this or that he's considering any great alternative. It could just be an accident. And yes, the fact that we have Donald Trump in the White House marks an end of an era of a belief in globalization and free movement of capital, goods, people, with a limitation of the role of states. And clearly this model, the post-Cold War model, is in crisis. And yes, we have the word Polycrisis in the name, in the title of this panel. What is Polycrisis? It's yes, the fact that we are dealing with several crises at the same time. Some years ago, some 15 years ago, we were dealing with another very strange word called permacrisis, and that was the era of some 10 years between the fall of Lehman Brothers until Brexit, when we were dealing with crises one after another. So we had the economic and financial crisis, then the Arab Spring, Russia's annexation of Crimea, migration crisis of 2015, and Brexit. Now, Polycrisis, as I said, we have to deal with all these huge crises at the same time. So we have COVID, we had Russian full-scale aggression against Ukraine, inflation, energy transformation, trade war, climate change, future of war, artificial intelligence. So it's very difficult to address this crisis at the same time, and we are in a reactive mode. But reactive mode means we are tackling the symptoms, but not the root causes. International multilateral system is unable to respond to it because international organizations themselves are in crisis. First, because the changes are happening too quickly, and the international organizations are unable to reflect these changes. And therefore, we see meetings like the COP30, which clearly fail to deliver on the expectations.
Do we have leaders that are capable to cope with that kind of speed?
That's exactly my next point, that also the countries, including the big ones, are now sort of trying to reconsider how to deal with this situation, are sort of looking for a new identity. They are trying to define each country, or practically, their position vis-a-vis United States under President Trump too, or their position towards China, or their position towards the Russian war in Ukraine. So that means this is not a good time for the countries to lead the change for a new, just multilateral system and global order when they still don't know how to position themselves. So this is a very sensitive period, but as you said, we need reasonable leaders who will realize that the challenges we are facing are of global nature, and therefore our response must be coordinated and of global nature too, because no single country can address the threats such as climate change or artificial intelligence or migration or you name it.
I'm very glad that this morning we have two former Estonian ministers of foreign affairs with us, and Baltics these days as well, because of the war in Ukraine and security architecture of Europe in new geopolitical circumstances. It's a kind of hotspot as well, and in the focus of European and international audience. Ms. Limets, since the end of the Cold War, military spending has never grown as in 2024. There are reports from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute that in 2024 it rose by 9.4% and reached the highest level ever recorded. We know that the war in Ukraine has struck a lot Northern and Eastern Europe, and respective countries there have started to invest much more into the defense. Estonia has plans to reach 5%. We know that NATO member countries have obliged themselves till 2035 to reach 5%. Of course, with some of the pushes of President Trump, but even prior to that, many countries, including Estonia, had those kind of plans. So my question would be, how much war in Ukraine has had implications, and this aggression that it continues, for European and global security in this polycrisis time?
Thank you very much for this question, and also for I'm really glad to be in this very interesting conference, tackling all those global issues that are very worrisome for many of us, and I'm glad that I have opportunity to share my views. Coming back to your question, then of course the war in Ukraine was a big wake-up call for European countries, and I assume also globally, because many of the debates have taken place in the United Nations and in the United Nations Security Council. In broader terms, these Polycrisis is of course very worrisome because from my perspective it creates new centers of powers and the fragmentation is a big challenge, particularly for small and medium-sized countries. And as we heard from our first speaker, then democracy is in decline over the decade. The indexes have shown us that there is a decline in democracy, in democratic values, and at the same time, authoritarian regimes strengthen their power. And the consequence related to that is, unfortunately, that there are more and more countries who tolerate that they tolerate changes of borders by force are tolerated. So, and this is the biggest challenge, I would say, for smaller and medium-sized countries. And coming back now to your question, this is also, of course, the reason why many countries, particularly in Europe, have decided to increase their defense budget. Estonia is among them, and yes, we reached the 5% of GDP spending already this year, and we truly hope that all NATO countries follow, as it was agreed initially. Yes, in 2014 there was discussion that NATO member states should spend about 2% of the GDP to defense. Now it was agreed that this should be 3.5%, plus also spending to critical infrastructure. Another consequence related to that is, unfortunately, that human security is under the threat, not only because of direct war that we see in Ukraine, how civilian population is attacked by Russians daily based, but also the same spending that countries still in peace put into defense forces, they could spend in social affairs. So I stop here and I look forward to our
in Europe, deterrence has become a magic world. We are living war economy, one could say, and war budgets are discussed in Brussels. Coming back and staying in Baltics, perhaps you could give your assessment on this when it comes to much more investing into the defense. But on the other side, we are seeing worldwide that transatlantic alliance countries are spending less for diplomacy, for their diplomatic representations. They are cutting off the budgets. On the other side, China, Russia, Turkey are taking the ground in many places in Africa. There is just, or Asia or Latin America, just one data that from 2002, Turkey, for instance, has widened the network of its diplomatic representations from 12 to 44. Do the Western countries are giving up of this soft power, and is there any way back once you lose it, and letting too much the other big players to take over?
Yes, thank you very much, first of all, inviting me here in this very interesting international conference. Yes, it's very hard to respond to your question because for me, who has been out of politics like last 10 years, I'm watching the world like just an ordinary citizen.
But perhaps you have even better perspective then, because you are not directly involved, you know.
Yes, and first, just directly trying to respond to your question, I think that we are now in the world what is very different, and I'm not sure if increasing the diplomatic efforts helps anymore us, because these traditional decades after the Second World War, I'm afraid this is finished, like this 50, 60 years normal multilateralism, building up cooperations between states, regions, globally. This is finished, and it's finished in quite a brutal way. I'd like to quote the famous, at least in Europe, Italian Swiss essayist Giuliano da Empoli, who quite recently issued an interesting essay which is called The Time of Predators. And here we are, when we are not sure anymore if the international law, which has been the base of international relations, if this international law is not present or it's violated very heavily, not only by aggressions like Russia against Ukraine, but also it's violated by more we have used to, from the part of the civilized leaders. And of course you understand whom I'm referring, that if the President of the United States just ignores, minimum ignores the international law, then the whole world, for me, it's getting upside down, and not only for me in Europe, at least I can speak apart as a European. We are not sure if we wake up next morning what is turned around by the next day.
It has become much more transactional values and human rights as well, somewhere in the second row of the audience, and that's it.
Yes, and this is the problem, that even in the old Roman times there was like a rule, pacta sunt servanda, but if countries are withdrawing from the international treaties, just they're exposing tariff taxes which are very strange, that from out of the blue, without negotiations, without cooperation, then that is a really major problem for the international community, for the world community in general. I remember in the beginning of 90s, our former president, Mr. Lennart Meri, he used to always say that international treaties are the security guarantee especially for the small states. And if now the international treaties are violated or ignored, then this causes really a major problem. And I very much agree with Mr. Diempoli that we are back in the times of predators.
Obviously, we are living, or we would witness, the time of strong men, not everybody to be equals around the table. That as well gives the new framework for the United Nations and the whole architecture of multilateral politics in the world these days. We have, Ellen Beth mentioned so many times the man, the elephant in the room, so I think the hiccups are on the other side of the ocean. How much this domestic polarization that we are witnessing, and many are saying that in the United States there is unwritten or unseen civil war as well, to those kind of levels or boundaries, how much that kind of domestic polarization has influenced discussion in the USA when it comes to war in Ukraine or the Middle East conflict, the latest between Israel and Palestinians, the Gaza issue, or the latest war between Israel and Iran, and the new round of it is expected in the new year.
Well, thanks so much, and I quite agree that when you think of the United States, it's 99.9% about one person, but I thought I'd offer some thoughts on things that perhaps are not covered as well in the media about the struggles within the United States. So polarization is for sure a way to characterize the social and political and cultural divides in American society, not unlike in many other countries where we don't even realize how much cognitive bias comes into what news we choose to read. So we all live in our own kind of media, self-reinforcing worlds, and this has now been analyzed as a way of why polarization happens, that people believe different truths, or they think they believe in different truths, and that way that produces politics is zero-sum politics, where people believe that the group they're associated with is always right, and the other group does not have any truth on their side. So that is a deep reality of today's America, but it does not align perfectly with our two-party system. So it is true that you could summarize to some extent what the beliefs of the Trump-dominated Republican Party believe, But in truth, it's a multi-factional coalition of different groups that have different worldviews about America's role in the world, about social issues at home, etc. Similarly, on the Democratic side, you have the progressive wing of the Democratic Party would like us to spend our money at home, so they are kind of neo-isolationists in a way. They want to change American priorities for spending, but you still have the more conventional Democratic Party that strongly believes in alliances and America's leadership role in the world, etc. So we cannot simplify that this polarization is a way of explaining political party behavior necessarily. I saw a number recently that said as much as 44 to 51% of Americans now consider themselves to be politically independent. They are fed up with both parties. So you have more people that are not completely identifying with either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, which really means that in our upcoming elections, the midterms, and then the next presidential cycle, there will be a real fight over where do these independent voters end up? You know, which party are they more likely to be associated with?
But taking into the account those kind of estimations or surveys, Donald Trump, for many, is not representing Republicans at all, or the circles around him.
And the polling suggests that he has, you know, his approval rates nationwide are down in the mid-30s. That's quite low. Usually a president, even when they've been in office and people have become a little bit disenchanted, will be in the low 40% of support. He's in the 30% of support. Now, Republicans still generally favor him, but if you take the population as a whole, his support is relatively weak. But how does that play out in foreign policy? So I think that on Ukraine, and I realize we've been on quite a roller coaster with Trump starting out favoring Russian victory, if you will, then interesting period where he wanted to engage with Zelensky. He had more sympathy for the Ukrainian position. He admired the courage of the Ukrainians. He reluctantly agreed to keep sending weapons to Ukraine under certain restrictions, etc. Now he's come back to his original position, which I think we have to understand as really all Trump is interested in is the Nobel Prize and backing the winner. I mean, he has a very instinctive, visceral desire to be with what he thinks is the strong, you know, prevailing winner. So if he's given information that the Russians are, you know, attacking Kyiv again with, you know, absolutely catastrophic drone attacks, etc., he thinks the war is turning in Russia's favor, and therefore, why don't we stop the war in favor of one party winning? It goes back to some Kissinger ideas of some wars, you want them to end where neither side is victorious. You don't want either party to be defeated and humiliated, but nor do you want either side to have a triumphant victory. So that would have been, I think, a smarter way to think about ending the Ukraine war. I'm not sure that's where we are right now. Gaza, Israel is more complicated. You have both passionately strong pro-Israel constituencies in both political parties, and you have people who are now more deeply concerned about the humanitarian effects, you know, against, you know, deep sympathy for the humanitarian plight of the Palestinians. You don't see as much passion for America's role in trying to create a Palestinian state. So my point is simply that even on foreign policy issues, there's no simple formula that the two poles of our society neatly translate into a coherent foreign policy.
Thank you. This is very much European panel, so we'll go back to Mary. That sorely would need to leave us very soon, just for perhaps one of your intervention more. When it comes to this thing that we have discussed even last year, strategic autonomy of Europe and European resilience, what would you say was the doctor's prescription now or the diagnosis? Are we close to any kind of stage that it's not satisfactory? Are we waking up from not coma, but let's say?
Yes, I think really that we have woken up already in Europe, and when I think about what the Commission is doing and the European countries altogether, now we are facing this new world order where we cannot be as dependent on the United States anymore in terms of defense. For example, Finland has been not one of those countries because Finland has taken care of its own defense for decades. But now as a member of NATO, we are part of that group too, and happy of that also now in the Europe we are preparing in a better way. And also the idea of preparedness union in terms of security and also preparing for all the crises which the Europe is facing. The Commission, together with the member countries, we have taken and are going to take very encouraging steps towards a better situation. But still a long way to go, and still I think we need to kind of waken up all the countries, all the members of the European Union to really understand this situation.
Very shortly before you leave, the last news regarding the peace treaty, if we could call it peace treaty regarding Ukraine, if it would be accepted as we are reading it with the content and remarks within the document as it has been stated, what would that mean for the European perspective? And how this is looked upon from Finland, which is on direct line with Russia?
Now, of course, we are very worried about the outcome of the negotiations, and we all know that Europe has really much tried to influence then the content of that peace treaty, and it really has to be so that Ukraine has a big say in the details of that treaty, and it cannot go that way. That it's dictated by Russia. We all know that, and if that would be the case, that would be very kind of unsolid basis for the peace in Europe, and in that terms, not acceptable.
Thank you very much for your comments and your participation.
Thank you very much.
Good luck and have a safe trip. Mr. Lajčák, strategic autonomy. We have discussed and mentioned war in Ukraine with some of the consequences that are part of this framework of Polycrisis. What if really, and everybody is expecting the new Israeli attack on Iran in January, that kind of attack would stipulate a new war and some new consequences, again, energy-wise, perhaps with migrants and refugees would start, that will tackle Europe for sure. Are we, as a continent, ready for polycrisis as such? Have we learned something from the war in Ukraine? Do we have capacities to deal with different crises simultaneously?
You know, European Union was created as a peace project, but unfortunately we are not living in time of peace, and European Union is adjusting to it. When it comes to our defense, we realized that we relied too much on the United States. We have taken the security guarantees and the military protection from the United States for granted. There was a formula loyalty for security. Now we can no longer be sure that the security will be provided, and therefore European Union realized that we really need to invest in our resilience and our ability to defend ourselves. So in this current European Commission, for the first time, we have a Commissioner for Defense, and the issue of increasing the military spending, of course, has been accepted. It's a huge increase, but we are also trying to streamline the defense industry and defense production to be more competitive. So European Union is responding, and even if people sometimes say that European Union is slow in its reaction, European reaction to the Russian aggression against Ukraine was very quick and very robust, and up until now European Union has adopted 19 packages of sanctions, trying to dry the resources for Russia to continue this war. At the same time, of course, there is an ongoing intense communication between the European Union and NATO, because majority of EU member states are also members of NATO, and probably the right formula for the European defense and European defense autonomy is to build a strong European pillar within NATO, so rather than to build an alternative to NATO, which is neither militarily nor financially feasible, but to be able to act on our own and not to turn to the United States every time there is a problem. Of course, this is something everyone understands in the European Union, and the work is progressing in this regard.
Very shortly, EU stands towards the Middle East, everything that goes on there. So Gaza, as such, we have seen there is no unanimous stance within the European Union when it comes to recognition of Palestinian states. Everybody is saying we are for two-state solution, but nothing happens for years. And on the other side, we have Iran, which is the second neuralgic spot and nuclear enrichment program. Those are the threats on the very brinks of the European basin.
Yes, indeed, and you know that European foreign policy is based on the consensual decision-making. When it comes to the Middle East, it is not a secret that there is no consensus, but the European Union is united in supporting the peace and supporting the people who are suffering as a consequence of the war, and supporting every initiative that is bringing peace. So in this case, the US initiative and the President Trump's peace plan was warmly welcomed by the European Union, and the European Union is contributing to the implementation of this plan.
Ms. Limits, information warfare. This is one of the modern way how to make a war. You don't need physically soldiers anymore so much, or tanks. Drones are enough, we see, but as well when it comes to those kind of hybrid threats or different ways how to influence societies, to endanger trust to institutions, to influence in the brackets or under brackets enemies society, information has become a very lethal weapon. Coming from the Baltics, I think you have your say to give about that.
Thank you very much for this crucial question when we speak about security today. But if I may, I would like to come back to this Ukraine war before, and I would like to just emphasize a few aspects that the international community, I would say, has missed the opportunity to change the direction in the developments that led to this full-fledged war and the much bigger security concerns in Europe than they could have been. And first, let me recall 2010, where there was the Astana summit, when already the first time Russia wanted to present the new security architecture for Europe. It was not agreed, and it was not, the text and the idea was not agreed among the OSCE member states, which was a positive thing. On the other hand, Russia continued to push this narrative in different international organizations, either the OSCE or the United Nations. And of course, the communication supported this Russia's narrative, and this is very much related to the disinformation. Unfortunately, already in 2014, we saw that Russia occupied Crimea and part of Ukraine. Before that, in 2008, it occupied part of Georgia, another small country in South Caucasus. And in 2021, it started to bring its military forces next to the Ukrainian borders, which was a big alarm for many countries who followed this situation, which led to the war in 2022. And why I presented this timeline is because of the facts that during those years, international community was too weak to pressure Russia to change these narratives, and often it was related to economic relations and benefits for other countries. So, and this is really big concern for international community, and it has led to this increased defense spendings and bigger concern for other countries who have borders with with Russia. And now, coming to this disinformation campaigns which often accompany Russia's aggression. And this is absolutely true that these disinformation campaigns take place in not only in the neighborhood of Russia, where there are often Russian-speaking communities, but also across Europe and also globally. And I think it's very difficult to fight disinformation campaigns because often it is mixed with media freedom. And Russia's tactics is really very good in this, and it is big concerns for us. I would say that it was really important step which European countries took, that they have forbidden some of the Russian-speaking channels which were spreading disinformation, and it has really diminished this influence. And last thing which I would like to mention here is, of course, the big concern for European countries nowadays is not only disinformation, but we call it hybrid threats, which means that there are also small attacks which Russia is organizing in different member states at the moment.
I wanted to just add that this information war of Russian trolls or Russian state is just a part of post-truth era where we are living, where everybody is a source and the truth as such is relativized and everything could be fake or true. So it's a part of a huge problem that we are living in the era of social media and many creators of content. But when it comes to other sorts of hybrid threats that are characterizing as well this polarized world full of crises, in Europe we are witnessing a new specific kind of the attacks. It's the critical infrastructure attack that is provided by malign actors as well, and mostly it's focused on energy and fibers that are in a focus for European security. Again, from Baltic's perspectives, how much this is important, having in mind that Europe wants to have the energy sovereignty, which I hope would not be to change cheap Russian gas for expensive American LNG, because that will not solve anything.
Yes, well, very shortly answering this question, now the European countries, I suppose all are rethinking their energy policies, their energy security policies, including Estonia and other Baltic states. We are dealing with that on a daily basis. And also to make also the supplying systems more secure and be able to stand against any kind of cyber attacks and its sector. This is like a daily basis thing. But if I may, I would like to come back to Ukrainian issue. The war in Europe is not only in Ukraine. In fact, this war has affected most of European states, especially the closer to Russian borders states. We have seen recently the explosions on the railway in Poland. We see, like on daily basis, strange hot air balls flying over the territories in the Baltic states, but also in the Nordic countries. The drones are disrupting the plane traveling. We don't know if we go to the airport if the plane is able to start or not because of the strange drones, and the strange drones, we all know where from they are coming from. So this is the problem. And secondly, concerning Ukraine and still international law, for me, Ukrainian case, this war is a litmus test for the further international law and the respect of international law. And what I mean is that if these war criminals, if the aggressors are not taken to responsibility as the international law foresees, if they are not taken to the international court to be responsible, then for Europe, the future will be mostly very, very fragile. And we don't know who will be the next country in Europe who will Russia attack.
Those kind of messages, if the international law is not respected and the ones that have breached it are sort of awarded, would be seen, and there would be an echo on the Pacific as well. That's for sure when it comes to some other issues and urgent places. Ellen Beth, this rivalry that we have mentioned in this battle for global balance between USA and China, how much this is present in the States these days, in a foreign policy, in moves that President Trump is doing? And we have tackled and mentioned a lot, and it's natural because, as I said, most of panelists here are from Europe, Ukrainian war. But are we ready for any kind of bigger clash on the Pacific? And United States, are they ready for any kind of those kind of events?
So if we take the trajectory from Trump's first time in office through the 4 years of the Biden administration to Trump, we definitely see a hardening and an institutionalization of the China threat problem. So the Pentagon, these national security strategy documents that the White House releases every few, there's been one in each of those administrations, really talks about China as the pacing threat. So all the critical decisions about defense investment, the defense industrial base, the priorities for, where we're going to deploy forces, et cetera, are all related to China. And yet, if we look at how the Trump administration now thinks the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere are a very high priority, the Middle East always turns out to be stickier than presidents want. They always want to leave the Middle East, but they find that they cannot. So we actually find, strangely, that China isn't the number 1, 2, and 3 topic that people think about every day. Certainly there's a whole community of people who only think about China-Taiwan scenarios and what will the U.S. do in certain contingencies. That, to me, is a critical test of what the future of U.S.-China relations will look like. But unlike in the Cold War, because the U.S. and China are so economically interdependent, most people, I think, come to the conclusion that we'll have to find some ways of coexisting, that there will not be this existential showdown between the United States and China where, one party has to win, that we will have to come up with mechanisms for, coexistence. A few years back, there were some ideas about a G2 world. What if we have a new bipolar world, but it's a more cooperative world where we figure out some rules of the road, that China is accepted as a peer in terms of the world economy, et cetera. That's a little bit idealistic right now, but Trump believes that he has a good working relationship with Xi. And so we're not at a moment of extremely acute tension over the U.S.-China relationship, but that could change at any moment.
Mr. Lajčák, we have witnessed especially BRICS as the most visible example of global South presence and perhaps a kind of solution they have set for this new multipolar world, for some kind of leverage. Something similar, perhaps, as in the past non-alignment movement was. After last Trump's moves and what he has managed to done when it comes to tariffs, threats, bilateral talks, has he managed to put down a bit the idea of BRICS, and if America was in danger by BRICS? And do you think that Global South could be something to count with in the future when it comes to new multipolar world?
Well, BRICS is a reality reflecting the global development, because, and I would not make the comparison between BRICS and non-aligned movement in a way, because after the World War II, when the multilateral system was built, for 45 years, the rules were quite clear and simple. We had the bipolar world, we had the US-led part of the world and the Soviet Union-led part of the world, and then we had the non-aligned movement countries which didn't want to belong to either of the two.
And of course, BRICS is much more economically based.
But what happened after that, after the end of the Cold War, we had some 20 years of unipolar world, US dominance, and since then, we are in this disarray in a way when it's really not clear what is the global architecture. But one thing is clear, and namely that the UN system and the international architecture was built on realities of the 1945. But the today's realities are very different, and therefore there is a huge group of countries, particularly what is called the Global South, which I don't really like very much because there are too many countries to be put in one basket. But there are countries of Asia, countries of Africa, who do not see this architecture as just because they don't feel being represented. And of course, the economic realities have changed enormously, and we have countries that have become real economic powerhouses. And of course, they want to have their say. And the BRICS is one reflection of this. And it has to be taken as a reality, and I think BRICS can play a very important role in, it's important that BRICS has its say on global things, because BRICS represents almost half of the world population and also world economy, so you cannot neglect the fact. But it's not only BRICS, it's also the African Union or the G20. I really believe that these groupings of countries can and should be more vocal and more active and visible in shaping the new global architecture.
Does that imply as well a reform of the United Nations Security Council?
Absolutely. We should start with that, of course, because, I mean, no one denies that the current composition of the permanent members with veto right no longer reflects the reality, and it's not just. And of course, this is a big trauma for many countries in the world. So this is where we should start, of course.
Christina, coming back again to Mr. Trump, of course, after him returning to power, he froze billions of dollars in development aid. 90% of US aid and contracts have been cut. So humanitarian sector worldwide has been ravished, one could say. And one estimates that cuts could cause 14 million premature deaths over 5 years, a third of them among children, especially in those poorer parts of the world. So, as saying that Europe especially and the world is investing so much more into the defense, and the biggest global player has cut as well this humanitarian development aid, could we say that we have a clear trend that many leaders, including states, have decided to sell peace and buy war? And what does that mean for the future of the world?
Yes, of course, it has most serious consequences. It's quite clear. And if I'm trying to respond to your question, and then I first, what comes to my mind is exactly now the fact that the European countries are going themselves to invest more and more to the defense industry, to make it fastly to be restored. Huge expenditures goes there, and we are going to lack ourselves ability to invest to our social spheres.
And research and innovation as well.
Exactly. Well, maybe innovation is coming together with the military industry. This is a good part of that. But nevertheless, yes.
So we are not going to invest in pharmaceutical dealing with diseases, but we are going to invest in innovation in arms. That's... yeah.
Maybe I'm not so much competent concerning the medical field, but concerning this, the military industry, I'm a bit now involved with that. And I think that the fast development of new technologies is a positive side of that. And investing to that is absolutely a right thing to do, but we should not forget the needs to invest the social sphere, to the infrastructure, social infrastructure, to the education, etc. And yes, we should be quite clear how we can assist and help the development policies what have been so many decades on our policies in Europe. There are already cuts what we share to the third countries in worldwide, and this is also the fact what we are facing right now.
Mrs. Limits, one of the consequences in Europe, especially in the last years, is the rise of right-wing parties or forces, which is reflected even in the European Parliament on the last elections, and populism as well. This is the consequence of societies being torn apart as well, socially, economically, demographically in Europe. What would you say how that looks like from the perspective of north of Europe? Integrated or not, newcomers as well, Ukrainian refugees there, labor force and issues of labor markets that are part of this jigsaw. So how much this whole story about new political forces, right-wing parties and populism has weakened Europe in this period?
Thank you very much for this question, and I think that here the most important thing to be emphasized is that this is democracy. So basically people have freedom to believe what they believe, either they are conservative values or liberal values, and yeah, somehow conservative values at the moment are very popular in some of the countries and for some people. At the same time, I think that this is really important to have open debate around it, and so people are free to choose what do they believe and gather behind those politicians who are supporting their interests. At the same time, I would like to emphasize also that, and come back to this disinformation, because often we see that some narratives that support conservative values, for example, particularly in my region, they are influenced by other countries or external forces which have a different or artificial angle. So they don't support conservative values per se, but they interlinked it with stories which are not true. And this is very problematic. But I would say that we have given a very grim picture at the moment about the situation in Europe, and I would like to bring in one positive aspect that we have seen related to this tragic war in Europe at the moment, and this is related to democratic reforms that very many countries are implementing at the moment, and I would say they are doing it more eagerly, and they would like to become members of the European Union. And this is also, I would say, as one of the consequences because of the war. For example, I have traveled a lot in Balkans and in South Caucasus recently, and those countries, they are changing towards more democratic governance. They are bringing in digital tools to have more efficient and open governance, and these trends, I would say, give optimism should give optimism to all of us.
Thank you, and we will end up, of course, with the United States of America, horizon out there on the other side of the ocean. What, if you would have this crystal ball, and having in mind your experience and knowledge, what would be your assessment? What would we expect when it comes to foreign policy and the American stance in a year to come, or perhaps even on a middle term till the end of this mandate of President Trump?
Well, that's a very hard question. I think most people assume that Trump is feeling reasonably confident that he completely dominates the institutional structures of the United States, and he will continue to deconstruct those post-World War II institutions and commitments. He's influenced, I think, by people who believe the United States should go back to a simpler social order that was largely Christian and white and male-dominated. It's too late to turn the clock back. We are a multicultural, very, very diverse country, but he seems to play to the nostalgia, and so he is really still very committed to a rather dramatic, radical change of how the United States functions at home and how it functions internationally. Yet, as I said before, there's independent voters, and we had recent elections in New Jersey and Virginia that suggest there's a real appetite for moderate return to kind of common sense values. And these are, I would say, conservative Democrats that can appeal to some independent voters. So 2 new governors, both of whom have national security experience. One was in the Navy, one was, I believe, in the intelligence community. We've seen 6 members of Congress stand up and promote videos where they are saying to the armed forces of the United States, you are protected if you want to refuse to follow an illegal order from the commander-in-chief. This has been tested in the courts over the years. I think this refers to deploying the armed forces to democratic-controlled cities in the United States. You know, we are facing multiple thresholds of almost a collapse of democratic norms in the United States. And if they are tested, we are seeing, you know, some moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats trying to remind people of what some of our core values are. So I think the jury is out of how far...
Those people, would that be moderate or modern Democrats or conservatives, do not have a finger on the button if they would like to start the attack on Venezuela or deal with China.
Of course,
you know.
yes. And we've also seen the courts favor a strong executive. The courts have leaned in the direction of the unitary executive, which means the concentration of power in the office of the president, no longer protecting what we used to call independent agencies that could function separate from the direct control of the White House. So our country is changing profoundly, and we don't know whether there's a counter force that will be sufficient to, you know, get us back on a different path.
And very shortly for the end, we have mentioned as well Latin America, knowing that the Mexican Bay has been renamed the American Bay, and plans or messages toward Venezuela, but not just Venezuela, of bringing back the courtyard to America, what we might expect in that part of the world?
Yeah. That's a bigger issue of whether we're moving to a sphere of influence world order, where the United States owns the Western Hemisphere, the Chinese own, you know, their zone, etc. So we didn't get to that topic. Maybe we'll get to it later today.
Or that we are going to the world of strong men that preach one another and think of each other as besties. Thank you very much for your participation to this panel. I would like to thank you, your audience, for your attention as well. And we are continuing our program. Thank you very much.